Hathor is our standard banner as rank Lakshana DPS, and she specializes in a very high burst damage with a low field time requirement and great AoE capabilities. Welcome, I'm Rivyn Elowen, but you may call me Rivy, and this is your complete guide to Dunkin' Donuts' most reliable delivery driver, Hathor. Let's begin with her trait. Yeah, the Hathor is one of the very few units in this game who actually have a trait, and it is very relevant to a gameplay. Hathor features a unique resource called Express Delivery Power. Those are the feathers above her HP bar, and I will simply call them stacks going forward. Various actions will generate a certain amount of stacks for her, pause if you need to. Furthermore, Hathor gains a fixed 5 ultimate energy upon gaining a stack. This fixed energy gain is, well, fixed and hence also not affected by charge efficiency. Hathor's trait will mark nearby enemies for 5 seconds, and if the team is attacked during this time by them, the mark will be consumed and also grant her 1 stack. This mark can be applied repeatedly, and it will do so if unmarked enemies remain nearby every 5 seconds. This effectively means that Hathor has the chance to obtain a stack once every odd 5 seconds, but it is dependent on the enemy attack pattern, and I found it more realistic to expect 1 stack every 15 to 20 seconds instead, primarily due to enemy attack behavior. She also features a 5-part basic attack string, which will be used occasionally when played as a bursty sub DPS and just slightly more often when played as an on-field main DPS. While her basic 4 and 5 have a very high multipliers, charge and also QTE generation as well as pretty high break values, her basic string is rather long and most enemies will not let you perform a full basic attack string, so it can be also surprisingly hard to get to her basic 4 and 5 as dodging will interrupt her basic string. Aside from her plunge attack that we won't use, well, at least not actively, she also features a charged basic attack, and by holding her basic attack we can do so. The multiplier on this attack is about half of that of a full basic 1-5 string, but it is also much faster. It attempts to also knock up enemies, and against targets that cannot be knocked up, or in other words bosses, she will automatically perform her plunge attack instead. There are a few notes I want to make here, because this skill is actually really good and we want to use it. But the skill also requires a knock-up to actually deal damage afterwards, as it will otherwise only be followed up by her plunge attack. As bosses cannot be knocked up, we prefer to not use this skill versus bosses, but it is very good in AoE scenarios. As a last note on this skill is not very well swap cancelable, as enemies will otherwise just remain in air without the following attack actually happening. Means we don't want to swap cancel this. Lastly, as for her basics, she has a critical riposte that also does what it is supposed to do, and as already established earlier, will grant her 1 stack up to once every 5 seconds. Hathor's skill can either be pressed or held, and because there is no downside to holding it just shortly, we always want to do it. In the worst case, it will grant us the same 2 stacks that her pressed skill does, but if attacked during it, we will gain 3 stacks instead, and it will also deal more damage regardless. The held skill applies a buff to her cold 5-star tracking, and this will become relevant later on when looking at her awakenings. She also features a second skill, which we will come back to in a bit. Her ultimate deals a large chunk of damage on a 15-second cooldown and 100 energy cost, and it is her most important ability. Upon cast, Hathor will enter the emergency delivery state for 5 seconds only or until switched out, and while in this rather short-lived state, she gains a movement speed and also an attack buff based on how many stacks she currently has, as well as access to her second skill. Because this attack buff is very sizable, we always want to make sure to only cast her ultimate with 6 stacks. Her second skill is only available during said state, and it can be recast up to thrice, with each cast requiring and consuming 1, 2, and 3 stacks for the first, a second, and a third cast respectively. Hathor also gains increased defense during her enhanced skill, but endgame enemies have a very high attack and getting hit during these will still hurt a lot. While she cannot be interrupted during her enhanced skills, you will find yourself in situations where you will take a damage, and a dedicated healer or shielder such as Ji-Yuan's A2 or even Fadia is probably recommended for most players. Lastly, because dodging resets her enhanced skill attack string, we ideally do not want to do so while in her state, and again that means we are probably likely to take damage. Her first passive grants her effectively 10% crit rate, and her second passive 1 stack each time she defeats an enemy. Great for stack generation in AoE scenarios, but she is ultimately still limited by her ultimate as we require it to spend obtained stacks, and also ultimately useless versus single target boss fights. Hathor's support skill is non-remarkable, but necessary for both Stain Remora for her first passive and also Charge, which are all Esper cycles she really wants. Lastly, while unrelated to her combat, and because I know people will comment on it if I don't at least mention it, she will give you free fonts once a day. Also, she can ride motorcycles in the overworld instead of our main character, and she is also the only one who can do that. Nearly all of her damage comes from her skills and ultimate, and because of her passive 1 granting her free damage, we prioritize as such. Unlock her first passive first and foremost, and then focus on leveling her skill, followed by her ultimate into her basics, support skill, and lastly her passive 2. While I acknowledge that her passive 2 is not useless and you can simply just unlock it anyway, all relevant endgame features single target bosses on the last floors, and hence this passive does nothing. I do personally not really care for trash mob scenarios. However, it will help you clearing on early in the first 18 Beyond the Rail stages, and because of that it can be worth it for you to simply unlock it. Hathor is very straightforward in how she wants to play. Hold her skill just shortly, ideally not getting attacked during it. Her best teams do not have a healer unless you run Ji-Yuan with her Awakening 2, her health is limited and level 90 bosses hit like a truck. At least from my limited experience of getting hit by trucks, that usually kills one. I would much rather perform a critical riposte instead for said additional stack. We do this up until we are at 6 stacks. When at 6 stacks, we then enter using her support skill, Trigger Stain, then use her ultimate, followed by her enhanced skill 3 times, and at least in AoE scenarios hold her basic attack before we switch her out. Do not switch out during her charge basic attack, as it will simply leave enemies floating rather than her performing her attack. You are also likely to take damage during her enhanced skill, so please be mindful of your health here. Rinse and repeat. Hathor's awakenings are better than they seem on paper. Her Awakening 1 grants you instant access to 6 stacks, front-loading your damage and also smoothing out rotations. Her A2 improves your rotation times by a lot by guaranteeing you a stack every once in a while from her trademark running out, and also makes her health skill always grant you 3 stacks now, regardless of whether or not we get hit during it. And because we don't want to get hit, this is a win. If we were to get hit, however, it will be 4 stacks instead, which I suppose is mainly relevant with Fadia, as there's otherwise no incentive to take damage in the first place. Her A3 is great for clearing AoE stages, but does absolutely nothing versus bosses, and her Awakenings 3 to 6 are simple damage increases, which can also be applied to both of her resonance effects. I would recommend her A2 first, as it improves her consistency by a lot and also stack generation versus single target bosses, then her A1, followed by her A6 and A5, and lastly her A4 and A3. Frankly, her A3 has a really good use in the first stages of Beyond the Rails, so you might want to switch your Awakenings here depending on the type of fights you take, but I suppose that is true for every unit. Most people skip right here, so hi, welcome! I hope you have a great day and my calculations will help you out. If you are not subscribed yet, please subscribe. Statistically, there is a good chance you are not yet subscribed. Thank you. I love you. Her signature is her best on slot, and because defeating the Headless Rider will grant you a free copy of it, I would not recommend you any other weapon. Raging Flames will also give you some very cool VFX on your motorcycles, so that's another win. Street Boxer is her best in slot set and what you should aim for. It helps out with building crit rate on her, which she otherwise often struggles with at least a little bit. Make sure to apply and have Stain active on the enemy before unleashing her damage combo. Devil's Blood Curse can actually work somewhat as well, but requires a crit rate main stat on her. Other options I personally would not recommend. Damage bonus is her best main stat choice, followed by crit damage and then crit rate. She gains a lot of attack percent from both her ultimate and also her type specialization already, so it is a worse choice. If you decide to run Devil's Blood Curse, aim for a crit rate main stat instead. I would highly recommend you to stick with a Street Boxer as a set, as it allows for more variety for her main stats, as well as given the small difference between damage bonus and crit damage, but if you really want to run Devil's Blood Curse, this would be your layout. As for her substats, focus on crit values first and foremost up until a maximum of 100% in combat, then damage bonus and lastly attack percent. Hathor shines best in a hypercarry team with access to both a Stain and Charge, as to not run into any ultimate uptime issues, and hence she pairs well with MC, Gioan and either of Haniel or Fadia. While Haniel allows for much higher damage potential in the team, Fadia can provide damage mitigation, which is especially relevant for Hathor, as she will take damage during her enhanced skill, whether you like it or not, and you cannot really take all too much of it. Again, endgame bosses deal a lot of damage. And yes, I am aware that Edgar exists and can provide healing, but outside of healing he does absolutely nothing, and I would much rather run MC for consistency and restart a few times rather than running Edgar. But I am also me, and you are not me. And hence you might prefer the comfortability of Edgar here over team performance, and hence I did want to mention it. Hathor can also work as a sub-DPS in a Gioan team, with either of MC or Haniel taking the last spot, albeit I would prefer Haniel over MC here, but both will work, so choose whoever you want to play and are more comfortable with. Hathor will also work well in an Aurelia team, providing access for herself, but well, more importantly for Aurelia. Lastly, Hathor can also work in a Nanali or Mint team, providing access to Charged, which is especially good for Nanali pre-Awakening 1, as it helps her with ultimate uptime, and also she can somewhat-ish solve Nanali's AoE issues. Sakari provides access to Hexed as well as some generic buffs and crowd control for AoE scenarios. Pros and cons. Hathor has a lot of burst damage while also being a pretty flexible sub or main DPS depending on your team's preference. However, she also does not really have that many great teams for herself and often requires a somewhat very specific setup to work well, namely with MC, Gioan and either of Haniel or Fadia, due to her high reliance on both Charged and Stain. She is also likely to take a lot of damage during her burst phase unless properly planned around. On the other hand, she is a more flexible and also frankly a stronger skier who comes with a free best in slot weapon and also free fonts each day as well. Also donuts. And with that, we are at the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, leave me a comment on your thoughts about Hathor and join the Discord. A special thanks goes to my YouTube and Patreon members who make this content possible. I appreciate all of you and wish you a great day. Peace!